In 1969.
There are about 7 people, including my father, in custody.
7 people, including my father, who died
And
in
how
custody.
cometh that such a thing should happen? Aki Amikote, number 1, my father who passed away on the 4th of February 1969, Nicodimas Kgoathe. Solomon Modipane, who also passed away on the 28th of February 1969. James Lengwe, who passed away on the 10th of March 1969. Caleb Mayikiso, who passed in June 1969. Jacob Munagudla, who also died in 1969. Amem Harrow. All these cases, September 27th, 1969. Is that possible?
Detention without trial became a permanent feature of South African law in 1963. The General Laws Amendment Act allowed detention for 90 days, then 180 days. By 1990, 78,000 had been in custody, of whom 73 died. And when they died, cause of death was investigated and established by the courts. In 33 instances, inquests proclaimed these deaths suicides. Sometimes fairies are found falling from a window. Sometimes fairies are found falling down the stairs, is how poet Aesop Patel describes it. Nicodimas Saloojee, the law said, did just that, fell to his death from a 7th floor window. He was 32, an attorney's clerk, who had been detained in July 1964. By September 9 of that year, he became a statistic, the 4th to die in detention. Rokaya Saloojee, his widow, learnt about fairies and falling the hard way.
In the meantime, everybody knew what happened to my husband, but I didn't, because maybe I didn't want to believe it. There was a press fellow by the name of Terry, and he said to me, Mrs. Saloojee, he says, I like a statement from you. So I said, Terry, how can I make a statement when I don't even know where my husband is? And I think he didn't think. He says, your husband is in the mortuary.
Then she learnt about the law the hard way.
On the inquest, when I did take that clothing, the inquest lasted about 5 minutes. And the magistrate, or whoever it is, when I went up to the dock, to the witness stand, I could only mention my name and where I stay and who was my husband. When I said I'd like to say something, I'd like to know why is there blood on my husband? Well, why was there blood on my husband's clothing? And the magistrate said, that will be all.
J. Straydon. He was not in a position to conclude that any person was to blame for my father's death. And that surprised us.
Ben Kgoathe and his family had reason to be surprised by this inquest finding. His father, Nicodimas Kgoathe, also died in police custody 3 years after Saloojee. He was said to have slipped on a bar of soap while bathing. He sustained head injuries and developed pneumonia, the court said. This despite evidence by at least 2 doctors that Nicodimas had been tortured before his death.
The first evidence was given by Dr. P.G.A. Joubert, who was the district surgeon. He spoke how he saw when he examined my late father, his own findings. What were his findings? He found that my father had lots of marks, that he'd been whipped with a shambok. He would also been beaten with the battle of a belt on his body.
Now,
even the Dr. Joubert,
the deceased before
he'd also been told by my father before he died that he'd slipped from a soap. But when the doctor said, no, this couldn't have been, my father changed the statement.
By the time Hawa Timol reportedly fell to his death from the 10th story of John Foster Square late in 1971, public disbelief in falling and slipping detainees developed a hard edge. A huge outcry and demand for a serious public inquiry into his death was launched. To this day, neither his mother nor his family believe he committed suicide in custody, rather that he was murdered.
They hit my son tremendously. They arrested him on a Friday and they killed him and said that he committed suicide. I want to know who assaulted him, and I want to know who lodged the complaint about my son. It took me quite a bit of difficulty to raise my children. It is 25 years now, and that I will not forget what happened. I ask the Almighty that I will not forget what happened, and that I need to know who lodged the complaint and what happened. I will not forget what happened. I need to know.
So at the end of the day, while we don't know whether he was killed in detention or whether he actually took his own life, I think for myself the difference is not particularly substantial. What we do know is if he hadn't been detained, he wouldn't have died.
For Elizabeth Lloyd, partner and fellow activist colleague of Neil Aggott, who was found hanging from the steel bars of his prison cell in 1981, death was ultimately the objective of detention. Medical doctor and trade unionist, Aggott was the first and last white person to die in detention.
If you look at the reaction of the security police under those circumstances, their reaction was not so much to kind of feel bad about what they'd done, but to be very angry about being caught out on it. And what we've seen since then is that deaths in detention have been consistently hidden. They couldn't afford another Neil Aggott.